Hey guys, it's Retrofuge. It's been a while, and sorry for disappearing for 2 months. I've been pretty busy. And one thing I want to talk about to make up for it is the indie game development scene, which has been really booming in the last decade or so, with many genres coming into prominence, such as RPGs, roguelikes, and Metrovanias, just to name the few. But while I've been seeing so many showcases on the topic of indie games, which have been warranted and pretty much been rising in terms of popularity, one genre which tends to get overlooked, to no surprise to me, is the 3D platformer genre, which really has been making huge developments since Hat in Time and Ukulele. But there's only one problem. There's really no videos on the topic, and I find that pretty weird considering it's been developing just as much, if not more, than the genres that I've been seeing which are more talked about. So, being myself and going through steamnextfest, I wanted to curate my own list of personal favorites that I'm looking forward to, and ones you can actually play right now. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. I went through a lot, so let's get on with it. There's no better game to start off this list with the likes of Motorslice. It's pretty much a 3D platformer which is more inspired by the likes of the Prince of Persia series rather than the mascot platformers we have grown used to. But it really works to its benefit because it's really an interesting game aesthetically as well as music wise. You play as this girl called P, which has to go up this mega structure after getting some odd job from some contractor, and it's pretty much her job to explore. And really the game shines in terms of the overall aesthetic and pretty much how you traverse. First, you use a chainsaw, which is pretty out there and radical in itself. Also, there's the fact that you can use it in various ways, is in to climb platforms and also pretty much slice some enemies, which is pretty much construction. And the whole theme around it is pretty cool. And you fight Janchuan bosses, which pretty much remind me of the Shadow of the Colossus games, which for most people is quite interesting that a platformer is taking this approach rather than taking the classic platformer that we pretty much are used to, like the Mario 64s. The game is really chill and it has a nice vibe, and the voice acting for the character isn't even so bad. And you learn more about the megastructure as you go through the game, and it pretty much gets me excited to play some more as the time comes. The game comes out in May, so hopefully I'll get a more complete review for this, because this is actually going to be a good one. If you were to tell me what Sonki is in a nutshell, I do not know, but one thing I can tell you, it's pretty much Jet Set Radio on an acid trip, and I think it works to its benefit, because honestly this game is caught me by surprise by just how interesting it was. I always loved weird games, and Sonki pretty much fills all the boxes of a weird game, but still retains an interesting charm. You pretty much play in a sense of, if you were playing Jet Set Radio, like in extreme sports sense, but you're not jumping from platform to platform, but rather you're skiing your way, and you know what? This is actually really intuitive. The story doesn't make any sense, and I'm not going to pretend I know what the story is, but the gameplay is absolutely superb. You pretty much play as this character called Sonki, which you go through a bunch of waves and jump from platform to platform, performing some various tricks, and this game can get pretty fast. In fact, this game can get so intense that I even dropped out a few times because it's just so fast paced. The platforming is pretty much the strongest part of it, and if you're getting into Sonki, don't think of a Mario 64, think of playing an extreme sports game, because this game will be quite off-putting for the uninitiated. But I think what I love about this game, it pretty much embodies what I want in the 3D platformer genre, with how it evolves its kind of style and try to give you new ways to play the game rather than keeping to the traditional ways that we're used to. But yeah, and the game is really colorful and pretty much has a vibe that is so aesthetically pleasing. For the low poly aesthetic that it's going for, it's honestly more visually pleasing than most games that I have seen in a good while, and I really hope this game does well. It comes out in the second quarter of 2026, so yeah, if you are looking forward to a weird looking low poly game which pretty much looks kind of strange but interesting, I will definitely recommend Sonki's Lagoon. If you're a fan of Bombun, Bombun is pretty much the game for you, because it really focuses on more the simplicity and the arcade experience, rather than just being a regular platformer that you just go from point A to B. And yes, its gameplay is just that, but I think the simplicity works to its advantage. You pretty much use your bombs as a way to traverse through platforms and get to the end of the stage. And you know what? I think that's pretty much good enough. Sometimes a platformer doesn't need to do anything bombastic, and I think Bombun just executes very well on its main mechanic. Considering that you just are throwing bombs from getting to point A to B, I really am surprised of how intuitive the level design can be and how the developer will throw different obstacles to pretty much keep it on your feet. A lot of the time, I'm spending my time avoiding enemies and trying to find ways to take them out rather than actually embracing the platforming itself. But either way, the game can be pretty interesting considering you don't really have the biggest jump, so you have to find a way to get from point A to B. The controls are a bit weird at first considering you kind of have to rewire your brain that your double jump is pretty much pressing X and square, in my case since I'm using a PS5 controller, to make a higher jump. But it also plays as a way to take down enemies from below, and your bombs can kill you, so there's that. And this is pretty much a really interesting way of influencing the genre without actually going out of your way to do something really new with it. I think Bombun really shines as a speedrunning game from getting from point A to B rather than pretty much being known for its exploration. Sure, the game is pretty much like Tori in a sense in terms of visual aesthetic, but I think that's pretty much what makes it shine. And the music is pretty stellar too, and I can't wish for anything more simple than this. If you really want a simple platformer to sink your teeth into, or even pass some time, Bombun is for you. The game is out now, and I totally recommend it. One Mind is a very unique take on the 3D platformer genre, and it tackles it in a way that I've never seen before. Basically, you control two monkeys, one on the left and one on the right, which basically the story is that the monkeys were conducting a potion and somehow they got their mind fused, so essentially you kind of play two characters at once. And so far it's actually pretty interesting in terms of the puzzle platforming. At first it's a bit confusing because essentially you have to control the characters on different analog sticks. The left analog stick controls the wizard monkey and the right analog stick controls the knight monkey, and so far it's actually been pretty interesting on how the game takes the platforming in different directions and never gets stale. Sure, when it comes to the gameplay, it can be a bit obtuse, especially when I was trying to get them to step on the switches at the same time to open the doors. But when playing the game actually teaches you hand and eye coordination pretty well, and it's a unique take on the 3D platformer genre that I've never seen before, and I'm so glad that One Mind is taking things in a different direction rather than just going the generic route. I would totally recommend it if you just want a new experience of how to play these games, because honestly, I think it has the potential to be quite an interesting one when it comes out. Anyone with a brain would never use the Hellscape app, which is called Twitter or X, created by this lunatic. But however, I would say this is how you find out about a lot of good indie games, and that's how I came across Teeto. And Teeto, I have a lot to say, but very little at the same time, because Teeto is really your by the books platformer. And I'm not saying this as a bad thing. I think when you comes to platformers, sometimes a little throwback is good once in a while, and Teeto plays into its strengths rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. You got your generic ground pound, your way to attack, and you have your Mario Odyssey-esque gameplay of combining with the environment in order to get new abilities to traverse through the level, and also you have a way of shooting balls, which is like the flood from Mario Sunshine, I guess. And you have to take out these things called shadows, which is your generic enemies, and that's about it. And you know what? I think that's a good thing. Sometimes Teeto's biggest strength is how it feels like a game which came out from back in the day. And it's visually pleasing too. And one of the few platforms on this list which has full-on voice acting, which I pretty much found it more charming than I thought I would. Usually when I hear indie voice acting, I kind of would have a mix of cringe because you can tell that the person has been doing this for the first time. But Teeto, for some reason, actually is really charming. And I can actually would have seen myself playing this as a kid. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel, but you know what? If it was someone's first platformer, I would totally recommend it. Because it's pretty simple and it's not going to be the most obtuse platformer like the ones back in the day. But hey, I think it's a good thing and I would recommend anyone to play this if they have the chance to. Speaking of throwbacks, which is more similar in terms of gameplay, I'm going to talk about Ratdoodle's Adventure. I nearly minced up that one for some reason. And Ratdoodle Adventure, I'm just going to call it Rat for now on, this is going to get annoying, is a 3D platformer which is more akin to the Mario 64. I mean, literally, you have literally the same move sets and this Ratdoodle fella pretty much plays like Mario. But this is where it gets quite different. It's not really full on Mario 64. Gameplay wise it is, but it actually visually isn't. And I will explain. Ratdoodle takes a more CGI workstation and early 3D modeling kind of look when it comes to the 3D platformers, and you know what, I think that's just what makes it so visually pleasing. And can I say that Ratdoodle has probably one of the best musics I've heard on this list. I don't know who is the composer, but whoever done this needs a freaking medal. It's pretty much plays like Mario 64, but you play as a rat, but it's actually quite open-ended in how you play the game. I think the only downside of the game is it can remind you of those old game sensibilities that you sometimes don't know where to go and how to get to certain places. But where it shines is that you can pretty much complete the game in any way possible. You don't actually have to go out of your way to do the main objective if you want to. And considering how visually pleasing and how relaxing the game is, I think this is pretty good. It does have a story, but it's pretty basic and it's pretty much something you can really skip over. But it's something really simple that gives you a motivation to actually go through the game. The characters are charming, the cutscenes are interesting if I do say so myself, pretty much taking on sort of like a claymation, almost early 3D animation style. I don't know how to describe it. And pretty much the characters pretty much make me smile every time I play the game. Honestly, if you really want a relaxing game to play and something that is quite familiar, Ratdoodle Adventure is for you, and I totally recommend it. You know, there's games that catch me by surprise when I first see them, and some games I just see that I just don't know why they're not talked about enough, and Junkster is one of them. And I think it's because mostly 3D platformers is an underrated genre, and also the fact that, let's be brutally honest, I have not really seen much promotion of the game outside just going through the list of SteamNextfest games. And you know what, from the demo that I played, I absolutely am shocked that no one is playing this. You're pretty much playing as Junkster, a robot which has been crash landed on some alien planet, and your job is to essentially collect junk, literally, to build his way to the end of the level. It's point A to B, but it acts more like a puzzle platformer than the traditional one. Yes, you have your basic combat like the likes of Ratchet and Clank, but outside that, you're mostly building contraptions in order to get to the end of the level. And I think that's what makes it really shine. Gone are the days that you're just jumping from platform to platform, you're building your way to it. And you can come up with really interesting combinations. Yes, the playfield can be pretty limited, but I think that's kind of the point. You can build yourself robots to get from higher places, or you can use platforms to your liking to get from different areas. And I think that's what makes the game really shine. And the visual aesthetic from the menus, from the actual game itself, and how the narrative is told through comic book panels really makes this game so much of a banger. And I would recommend it to anyone who really wants a puzzle platformer. For the first time, I actually had to think about what I'm doing rather than just mindlessly jumping on platforms. This game kind of tests your mind on how to get from point A to B rather than actually just going through platforms like the likes of Mario. I would recommend anyone who likes puzzle platformers, and Junkster is one you should definitely have on your list coming later this year. If I was to name a game which I adored every single minute of it, from start to finish and sunk in the most hours, and that would be The Last Cat. I don't know how I came across this, but when I was going through SteamNextfest and played this for the first time, I just could not believe that this game was actually slept on. It's insane atmosphere. The Ren and Stimpy like characters, the PS1 aesthetic, it almost feels like a game that should have been made back in the day, but somehow got stuck in a time warp and it's in 2026 for some reason. And you play as this character, which it's called, I can't even remember the name of the character, but doesn't matter. You have a giant hammer that you can spin like Crash Bandicoot, use to hit on enemies, and you throw bombs like Bomberman, and it's so satisfying to take down every enemy. And also with a variety of challenges to go through when you're actually collecting these gems in order to go through the end of the level. Blast Cats feels like a love letter to 3D platformers of the 2000s and the 90s, and it keeps the sensibilities that honestly feels like its own thing. What I love about Blast Cats the most is how unapologetically edgy it is while also being charming at the same time. It doesn't try too hard to be the most edgiest game ever, but it also has platforming which I do find pretty satisfying. Yes, at times you do see throwbacks to like Crash Bandicoot, especially with this boss more reminiscent of Papu Papu from Crash 1. However, it pretty much feels like its own thing. And what I like about the game is that the sound effects of the game as well actually complements the visual aesthetic. And the story is pretty fun to follow. And I kind of want to see more of it. It's really a shame that this game isn't talked about enough, and I bet when it releases, it's honestly going to be a banger. And I will recommend this to anyone who's into games like this or PS1 X games. Yeah, because Blast Cats is honestly the next step in the genre. This will be a bit of cheating because this is a game I actually support on Kickstarter when I saw the game for the first time. And this one will be called GearGrit. GearGrit is pretty much a Jak and Daxter inspired game, mostly inspired by the second game of the franchise, and it pretty much is the second game, and I don't hate it, I think it's actually a pretty good thing. When it comes to Jak and Daxter, the transition between the two games have always been kind of one of those things which left a sour taste in people's mouths. But with GearGrit being its own thing, it doesn't just copy Jak and Daxter, which makes it disingenuous, because it really isn't. Yes, visually it may look like it, but it feels like its own thing in terms of the aesthetic, and especially how you control the character. Yes, you have your typical moves that you are familiar with in the Jak series, but the game itself is honestly a vibe and pretty much has the most satisfying platforming of the bunch. When you're playing the game, when you have your typical moves like the dodge roll, you have a new move unique to the game called the ninja kick. The ninja kick allows you to go up in verticality or use it as a way to jump onto platforms when you reach an edge. And trust me, when I was playing through the demos of the game in the last few months or so, it's honestly the most satisfying gameplay ever. And the way it complements the combat as well makes it even more satisfying. I spent so much more time collecting all the bolts in the game, pretty much getting the costumes, just because on the platforming it feels so much satisfying. And the missions on top of that makes it even better. One thing I would say about GearGrit, it doesn't come out until the next year, so you won't be seeing this for a while, but when it does come out, it's going to be a banger, and I can't wait to see more. Well, that is the entire list, and man, that was quite a bit of platformers to go through. And yeah, I just wanted to show this because there's so many people who always will be complaining that there's no 3D platformers out there, and essentially the indie scene is so much better than ever, considering before the 2010s there was literally nothing in the 3D platforming landscape, and I'm so glad so much of it has improved. And for the most part, I think that's the sign of greater things to come. I mean, all these games I'm looking forward to and they're so good. I mean, I'm not even gonna lie, it's honestly one of the best things I've ever done, and I've enjoyed the vast majority of them as a grown man who just grew up with the Spyro series, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys for watching this entire video if you came to the end. I was hoping to do more showcases like this in the future. And obviously I haven't even scratched the surface. I mean, there was still Demon Tides and Bubsy 4D, which is coming out this year. And I just didn't want to make the video a bit too long and waste too much time, as in I did go over quite a bit anyway. So yeah, if you guys have any 3D platformers in the indie scene that you want to showcase, leave it in the comments below, and maybe I can make another list at some point. Maybe for something for 2027, or make it monthly even, because I want to get this momentum going. Anyway, this is Retrofuge. Like, comment, and subscribe, like every YouTuber says, and I see you in the next video. Hopefully, it won't take too long.